Welcome to APTN National News. The interim leader of Manitoba's Progressive Conservatives apologized on Wednesday to the families of Morgan Harris and Marcedes Myran in the Manitoba legislature after last week's discovery of potential human remains in a landfill north of Winnipeg. Previously, former Premier Heather Stefanson declined to search the landfill for the remains of two of four Indigenous women who were killed by a Winnipeg serial killer in May of 2022. Initially, the PC said the search was too dangerous and not feasible. Stefanson even campaigned during the 2023 provincial election with political ads to stand firm against searching the Prairie Green landfill. In the legislature this week, the PC's interim leader, Wayne Iwasco, said the party acted without empathy and lost its way in providing closure to the families. Cambria Harris, the oldest daughter of Morgan Harris, took to social media with questions around why the PC party didn't meet with the families first.
The government didn't make just an error, like they want to say. You know, they caused the catastrophe. They caused the divide. They tore apart a nation and a community and caused severe amounts of emotional distress to many, many people. To the point where it made others comfortable to come out and spew full-on white supremacy and racist comments against victims' families, but also Indigenous people going forward, not only in Winnipeg, but across Canada. So it's not just about an apology, it's about taking accountability for what you did and what errors you created and how you're going to change that.
And we'll have more on that apology in our evening newscast. The 15-year-old that is facing charges in relation to the quadruple homicide in Carry the Kettle, Nakota Nation in southern Saskatchewan appeared in court on Wednesday morning. The youth, who cannot be named due to the Youth Criminal Justice Act, appeared virtually in provincial court. He is facing 4 counts of first-degree murder and will remain in custody until his next court appearance, which is scheduled for March 19th. The judge also reiterated that the youth is not allowed to have any communication with his co-accused, 18-year-old Darius Reset, who is facing similar charges. Last Tuesday, Reset was in Regina's provincial court, where he was remanded in custody with his next court appearance scheduled for March 18th. Meanwhile, the Fowl Hills First Nations Police Service has arrested and charged the chief of the Carry the Kettle Nakota Nation in an ongoing financial crimes investigation. The announcement was made late Wednesday afternoon. According to police, 37-year-old Scott Ashapi was charged with fraud, theft, money laundering, and breach of trust. The Fowl Hills police say Ashapi is scheduled to appear in Indian Head Provincial Court on May 6th. In a social media post by Chief Ashapi, he said the charges are related to a few disgruntled councillors who have been trying to charge him for the 4th time. Since being stripped of her Order of Canada medals, Buffy Sainte-Marie told the Canadian press in a statement that she has returned the medals with a good heart and repeated she has never lied about her identity. The award-winning singer-songwriter said she's an American citizen and holds a U.S. passport, and that her Cree family in Piapot First Nation in southern Saskatchewan adopted her forever, and that will never change. Her statement comes after Rideau Hall said it terminated 2 Jubilee medals last January. The medals were given to Buffy in 2002 and 2012 and were associated with her membership to the Order of Canada in 1997. This comes after a 2023 CBC News report that questions Sainte-Marie's Indigenous heritage. In her statement to the Canadian press, Buffy Sainte-Marie added, "I've never treated my citizenship as a secret, and most of my friends and relatives in Canada have known I'm American, and it's never been an issue. Although it's true that I've never been certain of where I was born and did investigate the possibility that I may have been born in Canada, I still don't know." Sainte-Marie also challenged the previous CBC report, adding, "They didn't interview anybody who knew me or my growing up mother, but instead constructed a false narrative and then asked people to comment on it." U.S. President Donald Trump's 25% tariffs against Canada will also have an impact on the economies of First Nations, including Listagouche, a Mi'kmaq community in northern Quebec. As APTN's Savannah Craig reports, not only is Listagouche facing uncertainty, but the community says it's been left out of conversations with the Quebec and federal government to address the tariffs.
American President Donald Trump has finally delivered on his threats. 25% on Canada and 25% on Mexico.
He says he's punishing both countries, but these tariffs have hit First Nations as well.
The impacts it has right now is the uncertainty because the majority of the seafood that we harvest is sold, eventually transformed, processed, and then sold to the U.S. markets.
Denny Isaac is the Associate Director of Natural Resources for the Listugush Mi'kmaq government. He says Listugush exports between 80 to 90% of their snow crab to the United States. Isaac says its economy is going to be heavily impacted.
Snow crab depends on the season and the price and the stock, can bring in upwards to, could be $5 to $10 million annually. So quite important to the community because these revenues are outside of any type of government programming that comes from Indigenous Services Canada, and these are usually used to support community projects that ISC wouldn't support.
With uncertainty of how long these tariffs will be in place, it's possible the community may need to look for new sources of revenue.
We're kind of stuck right now, but I think moving forward, I think we need to start finding new markets and become a little more independent.
To offer ways to work together on how to respond to Trump's tariffs.
Few changes in the agenda for today.
The Assembly of First Nations of Quebec and Labrador says it's also been left out of these discussions.
I think the relationship between Canada and US is changing, and this is going to have an impact on our First Nation, that's for sure, and obviously on our land. So that's why we need to be there at the table.
The AFN-QL's newly elected regional chief, Francis Verreau-Paul, says First Nations need to be included in decision-making.
More than ever, we need to be united on different fronts.
In a press conference held in Montreal, APTN News asked Federal Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault why the AFN-QL and Listugush aren't part of any tariff talks.
Things are going very rapidly, but I'm confident that the federal government will reach out in the near future to the various nations and national Indigenous organizations.
While there are concerns about the long-term impacts of these tariffs, Isaac says he welcomes building cross-border relationships with Indigenous communities.
We don't have borders when the Mi'kmaq have under the Jay Treaty. We can freely cross the border, and we have, dual citizenship between U.S. and Canada. And so we're hoping that we can, find new partners and hopefully maybe it'll create new markets with our Indigenous brothers and sisters in the United States and their homelands and their territories.
Until then, Listugush is waiting to see how much of an impact Trump's tariffs will have on its economy. Savannah Craig, APTN National News, Montreal.
We need to take a quick break, but first a preview of what we're working on. On Wednesday, a groundbreaking ceremony took place on the site of the future Mercury care home in Grassy Narrows First Nation. The deal to build the facility was made 5 years ago following decades of activism by members and their supporters. APTN's Sarah Bettens was in the community and brings us an update.
We're here in Grassy Narrows First Nation, where we witnessed a groundbreaking ceremony for a new Mercury care facility. This is something the community has been fighting for generations. It's estimated that 90% of people in Grassy Narrows have experienced symptoms of mercury poisoning. Today, we heard from community members who have been directly impacted by mercury poisoning. And we'll have a full report on our evening newscast today.
Welcome back. Indigenous students from across Ontario gathered in Sault Ste. Marie this week in order to catch a glimpse of what a career in the skilled trades looks like. Hosted by Skills Ontario, the first annual Skilled Trade and Tech Summit gave students from grades 7 to 12 a chance to interact with trade professionals and participate in some hands-on demonstrations. APTN's Mike McDonald reports.
Everything from construction to robotics, welding, and cosmetology. Students participating at a trade summit aimed at Indigenous youth got the chance to experience it all. Organized by the First Nations, Métis and Inuit Initiatives branch of Skills Ontario, the summit set out to help address a labor and demographic gap.
There's a skilled trade shortage, so we need skilled trade workers, and Indigenous youth are the fastest growing population in Canada. So it just makes sense to have Indigenous youth kind of look at these careers, think about these careers, the benefits and the rewards of these careers, and then possibly pursue them in the future.
The North Shore Tribal Council sponsored the event. The organization's CEO says he's noticed a lack of interest in the trades among Indigenous students.
I watched my own children grow up, and a lot of their friends wind up taking social services in school because everyone else is doing it. But that's not for everyone. Social services, psychology, very important careers, but not everyone can do that.
Sioux College's Indigenous student recruiter says a lack of math and English skills has proven to be a barrier for some Indigenous students wanting to enter the trades, and the college offers a program which provides those students with the means of upgrading those skills.
The Bidawin program does have those areas where they can upgrade their math skills and English skills to be able to be successful when you go into our trades program that require many of those math components, and many of the courses that they're going to be going into in the trades related will be relevant to what math components that they need to be successful in it.
Organizers of this year's Trade and Tech Summit say around 1,200 students participated and that discussions about next year's event are already underway. Mike McDonald, APTN National News, Sault Ste. Marie.
It's Thursday, and that means Fraser Needham joins us next from Ottawa to tell us what's ahead on Nation to Nation. Fraser?
Coming up after the evening news, a proposed settlement agreement for Indigenous people who suffered abuse while patients at what were then known as Indian hospitals was announced in Ottawa today. We talked to one of the lawyers who represented class action litigants. Pam Palmer of Toronto Metropolitan University is also here to talk about the Trump tariffs, Liberal leadership race, and where Indigenous people fit in. And NDP MP Charlie Angus also drops by to talk about his campaign to boycott American goods in response to Donald Trump's threats against Canada. All this ahead on Nation to Nation.
Survivors of Canada's Indian hospitals are finally receiving compensation. We'll speak to the Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations when we come back. Stay with us. Starting on the east, Charlottetown 8, Halifax, Sun and 5. Cartwright minus 11, Happy Valley Goose Bay minus 17. Saguenay 4, St. Jovite 3. Sarnia 3, London minus 4. Big Trout Lake minus 11, Wawa minus 10. Puckatawagan minus 17, Thompson minus 16. Minus 7 in Winnipeg, Gimli minus 8. Regina minus 10, Saskatoon minus 9. Meadow Lake partly cloudy and minus 1, La Ronge minus 14. Rain in high level at 2, Peace River 4. Medicine Hat 7, Lethbridge 6. Kamloops 11, Vancouver 11. Fort Nelson 7 and partly cloudy, Smithers 5. Watson Lake 1, Mayo 1. Minus 15 in Yellowknife, Wati minus 14. Inuvik minus 10, Colville Lake minus 19. Baker Lake minus 21, Chesterfield minus 22. And Igloolik minus 19, Arctic Bay minus 24. Thanks for staying with us. Canada has signed a $1.1 billion settlement with survivors of Canada's Indian hospitals. The federal government has offered to settle a class action lawsuit that was seeking damages for the mistreatment of former patients in federal Indian hospitals. The announcement will be made today by Crown Indigenous Relations Minister Gary Anandasangri and Representative Plaintiff Anne Cecile Hardy in Ottawa. We recently spoke to Minister Anandasangri about what this all means. Here's that interview. Minister Anandasangri, thank you so much for joining us today. It has been a long time coming for the patients who went to the federal Indian hospitals in Canada. Can you tell us how important this announcement is for those who went to these 33 hospitals?
This is hugely significant. As you know, the last hospital closed in 1981. It operated from 1936 towards 1981, with the last one closed. There are a lot of survivors who have passed on, but for those who remain, this is hugely significant. They've held their stories, their experiences, the atrocities that took place close to their sleeve for many years. For many of them, this is the first time they're actually speaking about it. So I believe that it's a very important moment for the survivors, their families, but also for Canada.
Minister, it was also announced that the federal government will provide more than $500 million to help support the 100,000 survivors of these hospitals. Can you break down where this money will go and what that is expected to look like?
Sure. The first and most important part of the resolution involves supporting individual claimants, individual survivors, which includes compensation in the range of $100,000 up to $200,000, depending on the type of harm that they endured. There's also a $235 million that's set aside for healing and for other supports. There's an additional $150 million towards commemoration. And there's also funds available towards legal fees, ensuring that there's legal representation for every one of the claimants who come forward. The important aspect here is not the financial compensation, it is the broader issue of accepting and acknowledging and ensuring that the harms caused over the many years, for some, it was over 3 or 4 years, especially at a very young age, they've endured at federally run Indian hospitals, have some closure and have some answers, and also will enable them to move forward. So it is fundamentally important that for Canada we continue this path of reconciliation. We acknowledge past harms and enable people to build trust and move forward, as survivors.
Minister, do you have a message to those survivors who endured and went through unspeakable things in these hospitals? I'm talking about those who weren't allowed to leave the hospitals, living with TB for years as children, and those who had so many tests done against them against their will. They carry those scars to this day, and many of those survivors have passed away and also died in these hospitals and never went back to home to their families.
Look, I've been meeting with survivors across Canada. I've had a chance to speak to a number of very small groups and individual survivors, including the lead plaintiff in this case, Ms. Anne Hardy. And the common thread there is that there's an enormous sense of displacement and loss, and you know, I wouldn't even say anger, but real animosity towards what happened to them. I believe the acknowledgement that we're making tomorrow will put to rest, I think, some of the anxiety faced by many of the survivors. In a broader context, this is about us walking on this path of reconciliation. Many past childhood harms, especially, have had intergenerational impacts, not just on those who've endured these hardships, but also their descendants. And I believe what we're doing is enabling a reset of this relationship, building trust, and to ensure that people can move forward. You know, I met a middle-aged man in Vancouver a couple of weeks ago who is afraid to go to the hospital just to get basic treatment. He's afraid to go and be treated. And this is what people, for just, you know, just an emergency visit even, he's petrified about going. So these have left long-standing scars, and I'm very hopeful that this turns the page and allows us to move forward and really build up those who have endured so much and their descendants. And as a Canada, it enables us to you know, understand, to learn from this, to ensure that atrocities like this never happen, the mistakes of the past are not repeated again.
Minister, really quickly, are you able to speak to whether the families of those survivors will also be compensated?
Certainly have a compensation for those who were alive as of the filing of the court case, which was around 2016. So those who've deceased since that time are eligible for compensation, and they will certainly, their estates are eligible. With respect to the broader family class, they are able to access some of the wellness and mental health supports that's available through both Indigenous Services Canada, but also through the foundation that will be set up to do some of the healing.
Finally, Minister, what are the next steps following this announcement?
Well, this is a historic agreement between the lead plaintiff in this case, Ms. Hardy, and the class of those who went to federally run Indian hospitals. The next step here is that this agreement needs to be endorsed by the judge. There's a hearing that's set for the middle of June, and we're hopeful that the presiding judge will look favorably upon this agreement. And following the judge's endorsement, if they do endorse this agreement, then the next steps will be to establish an administrator and make sure that there's outreach across Canada, across all communities, especially remote, rural, northern areas, and to ensure that survivors know that this class action has been resolved and they may be entitled to some compensation. So that will take some time, but we're very much on the path towards resolving this claim. We have signed the agreement, so it is binding on the federal government, on successive governments. But as the judge endorses the agreement, then the next step for us would be to start working on decimating and ensuring the funds are available for the resolution of these claims for individuals who may be coming forth.
Minister, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much for speaking with us today.
Thank you.
And we'll have more on that story tonight on our evening newscast with Dennis Ward. Kathleen Martin's story is also up on our website at aptnnews.ca. And that's your daytime newscast for this Thursday. Dennis Ward is back with more stories for your evening newscast in a few hours. Please join us then. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you again tomorrow. Excellent.